surrounded by a whole lot of strength. He's surrounded by a whole lot of love, and all he has to do is add discipline.
Who is best to give you advice? And it's Will Smith, and I'm getting so much good advice.
Stop scrolling, because this wasn't a rumor, this wasn't a whisper, and this definitely wasn't supposed to come out like this. When 50 Cent opens his mouth, Hollywood doesn't brace for conversation, it braces for damage. And this time, he didn't just throw shade. He flipped the lights on Dot in a moment that felt less like commentary and more like a controlled detonation. 50 Cent dropped claims about Will Smith that sent shockwaves straight through the industry. Not vague hints. Not cryptic jokes, names, connections. Alleged mentorship dynamics that suddenly didn't sound inspirational, they sounded uncomfortable. The internet froze for half a second. Then it erupted, because Will Smith isn't just a movie star, he's a brand. A legacy. A carefully curated image built on wisdom, guidance, and clean Hollywood success. And 50, he doesn't poke brands.
He tests their foundations. What made this hit harder was the timing.
No build-up, no apology tour. Just claims dropped casually, like everyone was already supposed to know. Like this was an open secret that finally slipped into daylight. This wasn't gossip. This felt like a leak. And once those names started circulating, people realized this wasn't about one comment, it was about what Hollywood chooses to ignore. Until someone loud enough refuses to stay quiet. It didn't arrive as a press release or a polished interview. It came the way uncomfortable truths usually do, casually, confidently, and without permission. When 50 Cent spoke, it didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like someone talking out loud about something he believed had been whispered for years. No build-up, no dramatic pause. Just a few pointed remarks that landed heavy because of who they were about. And once listeners realized Will Smith was at the center of it, the internet stopped treating this like entertainment and started treating it like a situation. Because Will Smith isn't just famous, he's institutional. He's the guy who built a brand on wisdom, mentorship, and wholesome success stories. The friendly giant of Hollywood. The blueprint everyone points to when they talk about doing it the right way. That image matters. And that's exactly why the claims hit so hard. 50 didn't accuse with anger. He didn't rant. He didn't sound emotional. He spoke the way someone does when they think the room already knows what he's talking about. That tone alone made people uncomfortable. Because confidence without proof can still feel dangerous when it comes from someone who's survived Hollywood long enough to know how it works. The word that lit everything on fire was mentorship. Not in a flattering way. Not in a passing the torch narrative. But in a way that suggested power, influence, and dynamics people weren't ready to unpack. And when names started floating around in the conversation, the temperature jumped immediately. People didn't know what to focus on first. The implication? The audacity? Or the fact that 50 Cent of all people was saying it with zero hesitation. Like consequences weren't even on his radar. The reaction online was instant and split straight down the middle. One side said this was classic 50, provocative, strategic, a calculated poke at Hollywood's sacred cows. The other side said this felt different, less jokey, more deliberate. Like something he'd been waiting to say. That's when timelines started doing what they always do, digging. Old interviews resurfaced. Archived clips got dusted off. Quotes that once sounded inspirational were suddenly re-examined with suspicious ears. Not because they proved anything, but because context changes once doubt enters the room. People began asking questions they'd never asked before. What does mentorship actually mean in Hollywood? Who gets access to whom? And how often are power dynamics disguised as guidance when cameras aren't rolling? These weren't accusations yet. They were discomforts. And discomfort spreads faster than facts. The sarcasm online was ruthless. People joked that this made inspirational speeches feel like audition tapes. That motivational talk suddenly sounded like NDA negotiations. The jokes were wild, but the unease underneath them was real, because once a narrative cracks, everything around it gets questioned. Supporters rushed to Will Smith's defense, calling the claims irresponsible, baseless, and disrespectful. They pointed to decades of clean reputation, philanthropy, and public mentorship that helped careers rather than harmed them. Critics countered by saying that reputation doesn't equal transparency and silence doesn't equal innocence. And once that argument starts, nobody wins. What escalated the situation was how casual the claim felt. No dramatic delivery. No qualifiers, just a tone that implied familiarity. Like this wasn't news, it was overdue. That tone forced people to consider the possibility that Hollywood has conversations the public never hears. And that possibility alone was enough to keep the story alive. Commentary channels began breaking down every syllable. Not to prove truth, but to analyze intention. Why say this now? Why this way? Why Will Smith? Some speculated it was retaliation. Others said it was a warning shot. A few argued it was 50 Cent doing what he always does, challenging untouchable figures because he doesn't believe in untouchable figures. That interpretation stuck, because 50 has built a career out of surviving rooms where silence was expected. He's known for saying the thing people won't repeat publicly. Then watching who FLINCHES. And this time, a lot of people flinched. Hollywood insiders didn't comment directly, but their silence was loud. No immediate denials. No unified statements. Just a lot of nothing, which only fed speculation. The media treaded carefully. Headlines used words like suggests, implies, and raises questions. Everyone wanted clicks, but nobody wanted lawsuits. That balancing act made the story feel even more dangerous. Meanwhile, fans were split between disbelief and suspicion. Some refused to entertain the idea at all. Others said they weren't ready to accuse, but they were ready to listen, and listening is how narratives change. The uncomfortable truth is this: Hollywood runs on mentorship, on access, on doors opening quietly for some and never opening for others. And when someone questions how that system works, it rattles everyone inside it. That's why this wasn't brushed off as internet noise. Because if the claims were completely absurd, they would have been laughed away. Instead, they lingered. People didn't know what to believe, but they knew something felt exposed. Not proven, exposed. And once exposure happens, damage doesn't need confirmation to begin. Will Smith's name started trending, alongside words it had never been paired with before. Not crimes, not allegations, just discomfort. And that alone was enough to feel seismic. Every inspirational clip was now viewed through a new lens. Every old quote suddenly had subtext assigned to it. That's the risk of being a symbol. When the symbol cracks, even slightly, the pieces fall everywhere. 50 Cent didn't follow up immediately. No clarification. No doubling down. He let the statement exist on its own, like a match dropped into dry grass. And the internet did the rest. By the end of the day, this wasn't about what was said anymore. It was about what people were now willing to question. And once that door opens, it doesn't close quietly. This wasn't cancellation. It wasn't confirmation. It was something more unsettling. It was doubt. And doubt, once planted, grows faster than truth. Because what followed wasn't resolution, it was escalation. Once the initial shock wore off, the internet did what it always does when it smells ambiguity. It weaponized imagination. The claims didn't need receipts to travel. They only needed curiosity. And curiosity turned into a stampede within hours. Timelines flooded with clipped quotes, slowed down videos, and screenshots pulled so far out of context they needed passports. The story mutated with every retell. What started as commentary became conspiracy-adjacent speculation dressed up as analysis. Memes arrived first, because humor is how the internet processes discomfort. Inspirational quotes were remixed with side-eye captions. Old red carpet smiles were freeze-framed like they hid secrets. The jokes were loud, but the unease underneath them was louder. That's when pop culture comparisons started flying. People said this made Hollywood mentorship sound like a corporate maze with hidden trapdoors. Others joked it felt like finding out your favorite motivational speaker also sells fine print. The analogies were wild, but they stuck because they captured the confusion perfectly. And then the celebrity reactions began. Quietly. No press conferences. No direct callouts. Just carefully timed likes, reposts, and vague captions about accountability, power, and protecting young talent. Nobody named names, but everyone knew what moment those posts were orbiting. That silence with commentary approach poured gasoline on the fire. Supporters of Will Smith demanded evidence. They pointed out decades of philanthropy, mentorship programs, and public support for emerging creatives. They argued that implication without proof is reckless, and rumor culture ruins reputations faster than truth can save them. Critics pushed back by saying, no one was accusing, just questioning. And questioning, they argued, is how systems evolve. That line split the discourse straight down the middle. Meanwhile, 50 Cent became the center of a second debate. Was this courage or clout? A warning or a distraction? People dissected his history, his feuds, his past callouts, searching for a pattern that fit their preferred conclusion. Some said he thrives on disruption. Others argued he only speaks when he believes the room is lying. Both interpretations felt plausible, which made the moment even harder to pin down. Some said he thrives on disruption. Others argued he only speaks when he believes the room is lying. Both interpretations felt plausible, which made the moment even harder to pin down. Reaction channels turned the situation into a nightly saga. Panels debated intent, like it was a courtroom drama. Hosts played clips, paused mid-sentence, and asked audiences to read between the lines. Every show promised clarity and delivered more questions. The phrase "open secret" started trending, not attached to facts, just vibes. And vibes, in this case, were doing a lot of work. Hollywood insiders stayed carefully quiet. No public denials. No public endorsements. That neutrality wasn't reassuring, it was suspicious to viewers hungry for a signal. Silence, once again, was interpreted as strategy. And then the think pieces arrived. Long threads broke down mentorship culture across entertainment, comparing music, film, and sports. Writers argued that power imbalance doesn't require wrongdoing to cause harm, it just requires opacity. That argument reframed the story away from individuals and towards systems, which made it bigger. Suddenly, this wasn't about one claim or one person. It was about how access is granted, how influence moves quietly, and how little the public actually knows about career-making rooms. That reframing kept the conversation alive even as facts remained scarce. The outrage evolved too. It became less about anger and more about anxiety. People wondered how many stories never surface because the cost of speaking is too high. Others worried about what happens when speculation replaces evidence entirely. Those two fears collided non-stop. The memes slowed, but the discourse deepened. Jokes gave way to long captions. Long captions gave way to uncomfortable questions. And uncomfortable questions don't trend quickly, but they lingered. At the same time, defenders pushed back hard against what they called innuendo culture. They argued that implication can be just as damaging as false accusation. Especially when amplified by fame and algorithms, that argument found traction with audiences. Tired of trial by timeline. Yet the counterargument remained stubborn. If nobody ever asks questions publicly, nothing ever changes. And public figures, by definition, live in public conversation. That tug-of-war became the real headline. Media coverage reflected the tension. Articles used cautious language, avoided definitive claims, and emphasized reaction over substance. Headlines focused on internet reacts rather than what was said, which kept liability low and engagement high. The story refused to resolve. Every attempt to move on pulled it back into focus. New clips resurfaced. Old interviews gained new captions. A single word, mentorship, continued to carry too much weight, and still, no clarifications came. That absence created a vacuum where interpretation thrived. People filled the gap with personal experiences, industry anecdotes, and cautionary tales. The story became a mirror. Everyone saw what they were already worried about. For some, it exposed celebrity worship. For others, it highlighted how quickly narratives can spiral without guardrails. And for many, it simply confirmed that Hollywood transparency is a myth. The public wasn't unified. But it was engaged. By the time attention began to drift, the damage wasn't loud, it was embedded. Perceptions had shifted. Conversations had expanded. And certain names now carried an asterisk in people's minds. Even without proof, that's the danger zone of modern scandal. Not cancellation. Not confirmation. Just a permanent question mark. And when a story ends on a question mark, it never really ends. It waits. Waiting for the next comment. The next interview. The next moment that might accidentally connect the dots. Because once doubt enters the room, it doesn't need permission to stay. And what followed next wasn't a revelation. It was consequence. When the noise finally dipped, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like suspension. The kind of pause where everyone is waiting for something else to drop, even if they don't know what it is. The claims didn't get proven. They didn't get retracted. They just sat there heavy and unanswered. That's how reputations start to bend. For Will Smith, the immediate damage wasn't a headline. It was a shift. The tone around his name changed. Interviews felt more cautious. Praise sounded conditional. Admiration now came with footnotes, like people were mentally checking the fine print before clapping. That's not cancellation. That's erosion. Moments that once played as wisdom started getting reinterpreted as performance. Old mentorship stories were revisited with skepticism. Not to accuse, but to reassess. And reassessment is dangerous when your image is built on trust, because once the audience starts reevaluating, the past doesn't stay settled. Hollywood didn't rush to defend him publicly. And that silence did more damage than any statement could have. When institutions stay quiet, people assume calculation. When peers avoid the topic, it reads like discomfort. And discomfort implies proximity to something no one wants to name. The absence of a unified response spoke volumes. Meanwhile, industry conversations shifted behind the scenes. Mentorship programs emphasized transparency. Panels discussed boundaries more carefully. Language changed. Not dramatically, but deliberately. The system adjusted in small ways, like it felt seen. That's a consequence few people notice. But everyone feels. For 50 Cent, the fallout looked different. He didn't gain universal praise, but he gained attention of a particular kind. The kind reserved for people who disrupt rooms and don't apologize for the mess left behind. Some applauded his boldness. Others accused him of irresponsibility. Both reactions fed the same outcome. His voice carried weight, and weight comes with consequences too. He became the face of the question, not the answer. Every future comment he made was filtered through this moment. Was he exposing truths or stirring chaos? That ambiguity followed him, sharpening his image but narrowing his lane. The internet doesn't forget the tone of a disruption. Public opinion fractured into camps that stopped talking to each other. One side demanded accountability before admiration. The other demanded evidence before judgment. And neither side felt satisfied, because the story offered neither. That stalemate kept the conversation alive without resolution. Media outlets gradually moved on, but they never closed the file. References lingered. Language stayed cautious. Every time mentorship came up in relation to Hollywood, this moment hovered in the background like a ghost nobody invited. That's the power of an unresolved claim. For audiences, trust became conditional. Not just with one person, but with the idea of celebrity mentorship itself. People asked harder questions. Who benefits? Who controls access? Who decides what guidance looks like when power is uneven? Those questions outlived the headline, and while no definitive consequences landed publicly, subtle ones stacked privately. Invitations got more selective. Collaborations were weighed more carefully. Conversations were filtered through legal teams and PR language before they ever reached microphones. That's how influence shifts without announcements. The real impact wasn't scandal, it was caution. Caution crept into how stories were told, how praise was framed, and how legacy was discussed. Once a legacy becomes a topic of debate instead of a given, it loses some of its armor. And armor matters in Hollywood. This moment also exposed something uncomfortable about the internet itself. How quickly it can elevate suspicion into narrative. How easily implication replaces investigation. And how rarely clarity arrives once chaos takes the wheel. That realization made some people step back. Others leaned in harder. For those watching closely, the takeaway wasn't about guilt or innocence. It was about power. Who has it? How it moves. And how little of it is visible to the public until someone decides to pull a thread. Once the thread is pulled, the sweater never looks the same. The claims didn't end careers. They didn't topple institutions. But they did something quieter and arguably more lasting. They reframed conversations. They made people question assumptions they hadn't realized they were making. And that kind of shift doesn't reverse easily. As weeks passed, the urgency faded. but the imprint remained. The story became a reference point. A remember when moment that signaled a change in tone more than a change in facts. That's how culture moves sideways. Not forward. What happens next is the part nobody can predict. A clarification could come. A denial. A deeper explanation. Or nothing at all. Each option carries its own risk. And silence remains the safest and loudest choice at the same time, until something else happens. Because unresolved. Stories don't close. They wait for the next interview, the next slip, the next moment that connects dots, whether they belong together or not. And when that moment comes, this will resurface not as news, but as context. Context is powerful. Context decides how new information is received. And right now, the context is complicated. This wasn't an expose with a bow on it. It was a fracture. A visible crack that didn't shatter the glass, but made everyone notice it could break. And once people see the crack, they never look at the window the same way again. That's the real aftermath. Not outrage. Not redemption. Just a permanent question mark hovering over a story that refuses to end quietly. If you stayed all the way through, congratulations, you didn't just watch a story, you watched a crack form in real time. And if you're still here without hitting like, that's suspicious behavior. So do the right thing, smash that like button like it. Just dropped a vague statement and walked away. No hesitation.
No mercy.
The algorithm thrives on. The algorithm thrives on.